So 250 years ago, right now, the revolution was well underway. The American Revolution had been started. The Continental Congress was meeting in this building, Independence Hall. And one thing I've been doing every day is just checking letters that the Founding Fathers wrote back and forth to each other. So I figured I'd check today and see if I find anything interesting and share it with you. I've got my laptop right here. So I'm gonna be looking down and checking for letters. Okay, so today is June 24th, and we have 4 letters here. Let's take a look and see what's interesting. John Still's bill for clothing. That could be fun. Isaac Smith Sr. to John Adams. Long before this will reach you, you will have an account of action at Charlestown. Okay, so it's about the Charlestown bombardment. To Benjamin Franklin from Samuel Vaughan. This is the American Philosophical Society. I most sincerely congratulate you and your country. That could be nice. And then to George Washington from Valentine Crawford. I'm very sorry to inform you I received a letter from Mr. Cleveland of the 7th of June, wherein. Okay, so let's see. Let's start with, what shall we start with? Let's start with this bill for clothing. Let's just go in order. I think these all seem kind of interesting. So the bill for clothing. Let's look at the footnotes first. There are none. Okay, so we don't really know who this. I'm not sure who John Stills is. Please leave a comment in the comment if you know who John Still is and why this bill is here. On June 24th. To making suit of Nanking 6 shillings, I guess. 3 3/4 yards of linen at 3/6. All right, I don't know what that means. 13 buttons, thread, 1/6 silk, 3 hair, 2 buckram, and a third staying 1/6. I don't know what these words mean. And then November 7th, to making 2 pairs of drawers, 3 yards of superfine white flannel. Okay. I don't really know what these words mean, but you can see the accounting here. So if you know what, I guess buckram and staying are, I don't know what those are. Leave a comment. And also a suit of Nanking. Please also leave a comment about that if you know. Okay, next let's take a look at Isaac Smith Sr. to John Adams. Oh, this one's quite long. Let's see. Okay, that was the bell at Independence Hall that you just heard. Because it is 1 p.m. Okay, let's get through this. Mr. Adams, long before this will reach you, you will have an account of the action at Charlestown, in which though the regulars have gained an advantageous situation, have paid for it very dearly, which loss in military achievements is looked upon as trivial. The destruction of Charlestown is a most melancholy scene, as 3/4 of the inhabitants have lost their all. Brother Kent House, W House, as likewise Sister Austin houses are all destroyed. And although the chief of the people had removed and their effects, yet there were considerable of value in the town, and likewise a great many things belonging to Boston people, which had left in homes to be transported to the country, not expecting any such a devastation would take place so suddenly, and not being able to get carts, have lost them all, among which was Dr. Mathers, whose daughter came out the day before. Okay. You will be informed of the state of our affairs by those who have the management of them, but as we have had several times since the engagement people who have liberty to go up, by which some people get a chance down, one 3 days past and one yesterday, a captain of a ship being up there to see his owner, Mr. B, was a spectator from the beginning, a Saturday morning, and while there being connected with many of the friends of government falsely so called, by which his account believed to be as good as anyone's. He says he was on Copp's Hill when the orders came for the burning of the town, which was about the same time as the troops landed, and was at the seeing the wounded brought back, the dead theirs as well as ours being buried on Charleston's side. The talk was that they had lost and wounded about 1,000, about 300 of which was killed, amongst which numbers of 1,000, about 80 officers were killed and wounded, 30 of which number were dead, and many more, since amongst which was beside Major Pitcairn and Williams, Colonel Abercrombie, the latter yesterday intelligence brings, having died after getting to Boston. It was said Major someone fell, but he was not there. Okay, on the other side of the loss of Dr. Warren is great, and it was a great pity that ever there was the least thoughts of bestowing late honor upon him, being more wanted in other capacities. He was buried in Charlestown burying place. It is said that offers were made that any of his friends at Boston might attend his funeral. Yesterday morning, a transport arrived and landed her troops, said to be one ordered back from New York, of 16 sail bound there, and it's supposed a vessel has been sent to stop them from going to New York, so that it's likely we shall have them all here in a few days, which if so, hope the Connecticut forces will come this way, as it now takes a great many to secure the different passes. Since the martial law has been established in Boston, the people dare not open their mouths scarcely. Poor Shrimpton Hunt, your late neighbor, only saying a Saturday that he hoped our people would get the better, was taken up and confined, it said, in Gaol. A son of my late neighbor Gore, calling over the way to his sister to see a funeral come along, the pall holders left the corps. It said, though believed not true, and went and put him under guard 6 hours. Supposed by his father's influence he got clear. No person was allowed to be on their houses to look out on Sabbath day. None of the select men are allowed to come out. TB still remains there. Miss Gill got out the day I did. Your brother Smith was not in the late engagement, being confined to his chamber, not being well. Dr. Cotton, I hear, has been confined with rheumatism and other disorders. We have obstructed in business by the men of war, the cutters, so that I have had vessels designed here, obliged to go round to Ipswich, which goods must be carted from thence here. But in a few days we must expect more. The people, since the last battle, are removing their household goods from this town. I am, wishing your counsels may be conducted by an overruling providence for the purpose of lasting tranquility, your humble servant, Isaac Smith. And this is added on the cover, July 1st. A person yesterday from Boston says Jeremy Lovell is confined in gaol in the dungeon for nobody knows what. The inhabitants have no wood. An account has been taken of that. There are still in Boston, which amount to about 5,000. The same person who says he had the best information that the number of officers killed and wounded is rather more than 84 mentioned, and that 102 sergeants were killed and wounded, and that's the 52nd Regiment had lost 2 captains returned, or 2 officers, forget which. I hear the officers say that the Battle of Menden did not exceed it. I hope our new assembly or the general will make a demand of all the inhabitants that their effects of those who by contract ought to come out. There is a military watch kept by the friends of the government. Martin Gay, one of the captains, yours by Dr. Church, have received. Okay, here's a long footnote. I will scroll through it, and you can pause and read it if you would like. This is kind of interesting. It is very surprising to find traces of his hand. The identification of persons by their handwriting was being a treacherous business. The editor's conclusion that Gordon consulted the docketed some of John Adams' early revolutionary correspondence is put forth tentatively and in the expectation, or at least the hope, that it will be confirmed or disproved by evidence still to be found. But Gordon's spidery hand is highly individualistic and not easily mistaken for anyone else's. He was also a very pertinacious man and investigator, as shown by his letters gathered and edited by Worthington C. Ford, and by the references to privately owned materials in the preface, texts, and notes in his 4-volume history eventually published in London, 1788. He had, moreover, something of a habit of marking up the papers he examined when preparing his book. And it may be pointed out, let's read the rest. And it may be pointed out, finally, that the references in his correspondence show that Gordon and his wife visited AA in Braintree on a rather familiar footing at times when John Adams was absent. Light on this and on more important matters would doubtless be obtainable if Gordon's own papers survive and could be found. He spent his last years, died, and was buried at Ipswich in England, with the exception of a single letter. The present editors, though they have made extensive inquiries, have found no traces of what must once have been a formidable mass of correspondence and other MSS in Gordon's possession. Apparently they were not dispersed, but if not, were they entirely destroyed, or do they lurk somewhere more or less intact? So that's an interesting little historical mystery to be solved. Okay, next let's read To Benjamin Franklin from Samuel Vaughan. Montego Bay, Jamaica, 24th of June, 1775. My dear sir, I most sincerely congratulate you and your country upon your safe arrival in America. After many years' watchful attention to its interest, and when you could render it no further service at home, you are at length arrived to the only asylum, and at the most critical juncture, to take your place and to display your distinguished abilities among a set of worthies whose fame will be immortal, struggling for the preservation of the small remains of British liberty, now banished from its once happy isle to America, the last place of its resort. God grant you success equal to the justice and importance of your cause, and may it flourish there until the end of time. I should have fulfilled my intention of making the tour of North America with my son, had not the sword been drawn. Had I went, I could not, with my quick sensibility, have refrained taking an active part, though without power to render adequate service, being unknown there, without acquaintance or natural interest to give me influence, and to the certain consequence would have been sequestration of all my property in this island. I therefore thought it more prudent to continue here until the spring, in hopes by that time to have a more favorable prospect for laying a plan for throwing my small mite with advantage into the public weal. I have not had the favor of an answer from Masters Wellings or from Mr. Yates, whose character and conduct I truly revere. Their virtue will be transmitted with its native luster to posterity. Should the times permit a few moments' thought from more public concerns, may I hope you will bear in mind and procure, if in your power, proper settlements for my sons John and Charles, for whom I will pledge myself, that they will not disgrace even your recommendation. My son is at present in Hanover, or he would not have failed to have done himself the pleasure of writing you by this conveyance, as I am sure he is equally with him myself. Dear sir, your affectionate and most obedient humble servant, Samuel Vaughan. So it's just saying who these people were. Yates may well have been Richard Yates, a New York merchant who had Philadelphia connections and traded with the West Indies. And Thomas Willing was... Wellings is undoubtedly Thomas Willing of Willing, Morris & Co., for whom you can see this reference. Vaughan had 11 children, most of whom grew to maturity and many of whom were remarkable for longevity. John and Charles were young enough so that neither of them was likely to have been on his own in Hanover. That son was doubtless either Benjamin or William, and we suspect the former because of his connection to Benjamin Franklin. The family went to America after the war, and 4 of the children settled there. Okay, let's take a look at the last letter for today. This is from George Washington, or to George Washington from Valentine Crawford. Let's start reading. From Valentine Crawford, Jacobs Creek, Pennsylvania. Dear Sir, I am very sorry to inform you I received a letter from Mr. Cleveland of the 7th of June, wherein he seems to be in a good deal of distress. 5 of the servants has run away and plagued him a good deal. They got to the Indians' towns, but by the assistance of one Mr. Duncan, a trader, he has got them again, and he has sent 3 of them by a man he had hired with a letter to my brother Willem or myself to sell them for you, but the man sold them himself somewhere about Wheeling on his way up and never brought them to us for 20 shillings pen, 20 shillings pen currency, and given 1 year's credit, which was very low, and he did not receive 1 shilling, which was contrary to Cleveland's orders to him, as he was to raise some cash from the sales to purchase provisions, and I think it would be advisable if the men they are sold to is not good to take them from them and sell them again, but the man shan't be shopped for want of money, for I will furnish him and will assist Mr. Simpson in getting started as quick as possible with his canoe and provisions. Mr. Cleveland left some corn at Mr. Simpson's when he went down, and I will get him some flowers and load his canoe. Mr. Cleveland sank a canoe going down and lost 5 or 6 casks of corn and several other things, and Mr. James McCormick and Charles Morgan found a bag of clothes and several other things a few days after, as they was going down the river, delivered them to Mr. Cleveland again, and they knew they belonged to his company by some papers they found in the bundle. Cleveland does not mention of getting any, but the 3 servant he sent to be sold, but Mr. Duncan told me yesterday at Fort Donmore that he had got the whole 5 that run away. Dr. Crake's manager has had very bad luck, for in the canoe that was sunk he lost all his papers and was much at a loss to find his land, or at least to find the corner trees, but I have sent him all the plans, the plats and instructions I had from the doctor. Least the letter I have wrote to him should miscarry you. Can inform him I hope to be down in Fairfax as soon as ever I reap my harvest, and will settle all my account with you. We had chose committees out here and are a raising independent company and regulate matters and the best we can, but an unhappy confusion happened the other day. The Pennsylvanians came to Fort Pitt and took Major Connolly about midnight with the sheriff and about 20 men, and carried him as far as Legionnaire the very night before he was to have the meeting with the Indians and several of the Pennsylvania traders. By the Indian story was endeavoring to put ill in the minds of the Indians, but on Major Connolly being taken, the people of Cherty came in a company and seized 3 of the I think he means Pennsylvania magistrates, who were concerned in taking of Connolly, George Wilson, Joseph Spear, and Dedrick Smith, and sent them in an old leaky boat down to Fort Fincastle under a guard. But our court had now hand in this, but it was done by a mob or set of Connolly's friends that lives in Cherty's Creek. But there was all the members of our committee who wrote a very spirited letter to the gentlemen of Penn Committee on demand Connolly back, and all signed it and sent it with an express, on the receipt of which they amendently sent, I think he means immediately sent Major Connolly back, and things seems to be a little moderated, and I believe the Indians want nothing but peace, but it seemed to alarm very much to hear our great man was stole, and indeed it alarmed us all very much, as Major Connolly was the man that had done and transacted all the business with them before now. Other person was so able to settle business with them as him. So I hope you will excuse the length of my letter, and I am, Dr. Sir, yours most humble servant, Crawford. Nota bene, please to give my compliments to Mr. Lund, Washington, and tell him his people is well and in a very good way to make a good crop of corn. Okay, a little note. Valentine Crawford, 1777, lived on Jacobs Creek in western Pennsylvania, several miles north of Stewart's Crossing on the Yogiogany River, now the site of Connellsville, PA, where his brother William Crawford had settled. Both men were deeply involved in George Washington's efforts to acquire large holdings of land west of the Allegheny Mountains. During the late 1760s and early 1770s, William Crawford surveyed a number of tracts for George Washington, including one of the Yogiogany, one near Chartiers Creek, and several along the Kanawha and Ohio rivers. To preserve his titles to those Kanawha and Ohio lands, George Washington engaged Valentine Crawford in the spring of 1774 to take a party of workers down the Ohio and seat his tracts by building houses and cultivating fields as required by Virginia law. That expedition was canceled before it started because of the outbreak of Dunmore's War. Wow, okay, here's a long, let's read this anyway, but this is a footnote. Quite long. On the 10th of January, 1775, George Washington hired James Cleveland of Loudoun County, Virginia, to do what Valentine Crawford had been prevented from doing the previous year: lead an expedition down the Ohio to improve his Ohio and Kanawha lands. Cleveland reached George Washington's tract near the mouth of the Kanawha in late April, but his work went slowly. He described his difficulties, in particular the problem of the runaway indentured servants, to George Washington in letters of 12 and 21st of May and 7th of June, 1775. The 5 runaways who tried to escape to the Shawnee town on the Muskingum River were caught, but one man ran off again before he could be brought back to Cleveland's camp. Cleveland did not think it worth the time to try to recapture him. Of the 4 servants who were returned, Cleveland considered 3 to be poor workers, and apparently they were the ones sold. The Indian trader who assisted Cleveland in recovering the runaways was David Duncan of Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. During the latter part of the Revolution, Duncan moved his home to western Pennsylvania and served as Deputy Quartermaster General at Fort Pitt. Fort Pitt was called Fort Dunmore by Virginians during 1774 and 1775 in honor of their royal governor, John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore. Gilbert Simpson, Jr., with whom Cleveland left 3 barrels of corn, was George Washington's manager at Washington's Bottom, the tract of land that George Washington owned on the Youghiogheny River at the site of present-day Perryopolis, Pennsylvania. For Cleveland's account of the canoe that sank on the way down the Ohio, see Cleveland to George Washington on the 12th of May, 1775. James McCormick of Berkeley County, Virginia, now West Virginia, served as a soldier under George Washington during the Fort Necessity campaign in 1754. Charles Morgan became George Washington's rent collector in western Pennsylvania in 1794. He was appointed one of the Continental. Okay, interesting. Little footnote on James Craik here. You can read that. Let's read this next long footnote. This seems like a continuation of the story here. Jurisdiction over the area around the forks of the Ohio had long been contested between Virginia and Pennsylvania, and by 1775 the 2 colonies had established river local governments in the region. Virginia included the disputed territory within the boundaries of its district of West Augusta in February 1775. A court for West Augusta was convened at Pittsburgh. Pennsylvania considered the area to be part of its Westmoreland County, whose court sat at Hannahstown, about 30 miles east of Pittsburgh. Dr. John Connolly, a physician and land speculator, was Governor Dunmore's chief representative at Pittsburgh, despite the fact that Connolly was a native Pennsylvanian. Appointed commandant of militia at Pittsburgh by Dunmore, Connolly took possession of the abandoned Fort Pitt in January 1774, renamed it Fort Dunmore, and summoned the local inhabitants to form a militia under his command. His actions greatly angered Pennsylvania's adherents in the area, and there ensued a series of arrests and counter-arrests by Virginia and Pennsylvania officials, of which the ones mentioned in this letter were only the latest. On 22nd of June 1775, the sheriff, let's see if I can highlight it properly. The sheriff of Westmoreland County, John Carnegan, arrived at Pittsburgh with a force of men, including Westmoreland Justice George Wilson of George's Creek, and freed James Cavett and Robert Hanna, 2 Westmoreland judges, whom Connolly had held under arrest since February. At the same time, Carnarvon arrested Connolly and took him to the house of Arthur's St. Clair, a Westmoreland justice and future Continental General who lived at Fort Legionnaire, about 45 miles east of Pittsburgh. In reprisal for Carnarvon's actions, a group of Connolly's supporters from Chartier Creek, southwest of Pittsburgh, led by Captain George Gibson, seized George Wilson and 2 other Westmoreland justices, Joseph Spear and Devereux Smith, both Indian traders residing at Pittsburgh. Those 3 prisoners were sent to Fort Fincastle at Wheeling, which a Virginia force commanded by William Crawford had built the year before. The problems caused by these arrests were settled by the committees of safety for the 2 rival governments, both of which were chosen on 16th of May, 1775. The West Augusta Committee included not only Virginia justices, such as William Crawford, but also 2 of the Pennsylvania justices, who were seized in June, George Wilson and Devereux Smith. John Connolly was not a member of the West Augusta Committee, however. Because of his close ties to Governor Dunmore, he became a staunch loyalist, and he was attempting at this time to organize support for the royal government on the western frontier. The West Augusta Committee was particularly fearful that Connolly would use his considerable skills as an Indian negotiator to persuade the Indians living north of the Ohio to ally themselves with the king against his rebelling subjects. But they also found themselves in the embarrassing position of having to depend on Connolly to conduct a previously scheduled peace council with those Indians. At the conclusion of Dunmore's War in October 1774, Governor Dunmore promised the defeated Indians that their hostages would be returned and a final peace made at Pittsburgh the next spring. Connolly was preparing to negotiate this peace under the watchful eyes of the members of the West Augusta Committee when he was suddenly carried off by the Pennsylvanians, leaving the assembled chiefs puzzled and the committee members frustrated in their desire to placate the Indians. To remedy the unfortunate turn of events, the West Augusta Committee not only persuaded the Westmoreland Committee to return Connolly, but also secured the release of 3 Pennsylvania justices whose seizure it condemned as illegal. Connolly conferred with the Indian chiefs at Pittsburgh on 29th of June, and between 3rd and 6th of July, he concluded a peace that satisfied the West Augusta Committee, even though the Shawnee were absent. During the next several months, Connolly vigorously pursued a scheme for raising a loyalist force west of the Alleghenies. In November 1775, American authorities arrested Connolly and eventually imprisoned him at Pennsylvania. Wow. The border dispute between Virginia and Pennsylvania was not settled until 1780. William Crawford procured a tract of land near the Youghiogheny River for Lund, Washington, sometime before the fall of 1770. All right, there you go. So those are the letters for today. We had 4 letters, and that story about the disputes between the Virginians and Pennsylvania and the Indians was very interesting. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.